Welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I'm Kate Dickerson. Before I introduce our guest, a quick note that at the end of this episode, we have some MSF updates about the 2022 Maine Science Festival. Today's episode is a conversation with Christie Mahaffey, a founder and partner at Foundation Brewing Company. I've known Christie for a while and always enjoy talking with her. One of the things that I learned in our conversation is just how wide and varied her science interests are. I had no idea that she started in biology, moved to human ecology, and ended up in an interdisciplinary area of mechanical engineering and material science with a biological application before changing gears to beer. Christie's path is a good reminder that science can take you to a bunch of different areas and locations, and that by applying your understanding in one area to a new one, you can be led on a whole new path. Christie, welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I am delighted to have you here, not just because I love your beer, but also because I think you've had a really interesting path to get to quality control for beer, not least of which, if I remember correctly, your PhD's in mechanical engineering, which is not intuitive with beer.
No, it's not. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So if you could just give us a little bit of a background on, first of all, your love of science. You and I have had many conversations about this and just kind of how cool different parts of science are, but how you went from studying horses and racetracks into beer would be so cool, I think, for people to hear.
For sure. And I absolutely love science. I'll take it a step further back because we were talking earlier about, when did you know that you wanted to get into science? And for me, it really, I couldn't give you an age, but pretty early on, I decided I want to be a doctor. So I knew you had to do science to be a doctor. And I obviously didn't become a medical doctor, and because that wasn't the right path for me. But as a kid, it was the only real tangible thing that I understood for doing sciencey things. So I when I started college at Penn State, I showed up. I had loved my physics class in high school. So I thought mechanical engineering or biology or music. And I'm sitting there an undecided major, and the counselor said, okay, let's do some science courses and see what happens. And I still absolutely love music, but that was not going to be my profession. That was not the fit for me. And I did end up in engineering, as you know, eventually, but for my undergraduate, I actually went in the biology track and graduated with my BS in biology and a focus on ecology. And that was largely because I thought that meant I could play outside all day and that I wouldn't be stuck behind a computer. The irony is that for my work, I actually really love being in front of my computer now doing math problems.
That is pretty ironic, actually.
So fast forward, I took, I was eager to get to graduate school again because of some misconceptions, but it actually worked out really well for me. So I took some time doing different jobs and internships. Eventually went on to do my master's in human ecology at College of the Atlantic. So I went from this huge state school, Penn State, which I absolutely loved because in such a big school, there's so many opportunities to find your little niche. And then I did this really teeny tiny school in Bar Harbor, Maine, which was the other extreme, also a great learning experience. And my focus was on geographic information systems and applying them to marine mammal conservation type questions. Through that work, I realized that because it was human ecology, I had this policy piece to my thesis, which was, again, not my strength. And I thought, wow, I really admire the policy people. Good work. Keep doing it. This isn't my bag. But I absolutely loved thinking about how to apply math, basically, and these different dimensions of information, spatially and temporally, into a question, and then hopefully applying it. And at that point, I wanted to see more applications. So I did another pivot where I landed at UMaine doing engineering, which was actually interdisciplinary. Having come from a non-engineering background, I did a crash 2 years of undergraduate mechanical engineering, which was intense, but as a grad student, you're just burying yourself in it. So I love it. I mean, there's some of my greatest academic memories there. And so eventually I ended up, it was an interdisciplinary program because I never could really decide on this is the one thing, and landed with mechanical engineering and material science with sort of a biological application.
Okay, I have a couple of questions already. You said you had misconceptions about grad school that ended up working out. What were those?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Trying to think of how to succinctly answer that. So really, I thought that I wanted to be a professor, and right through, midway through my PhD, I still thought I want to be a professor because that's, in my mind, that's what you needed to do in order to do research. And along my path, I actually I had a lot of different kinds of outlets for teaching, which I really enjoyed. So I thought, okay, that sort of reinforced this idea. I want to be a professor. So I knew I had to go through grad school to get to that point, not really fully understanding what that meant, other than I saw it as some boxes to check. So, check the box on learning how to write grants, check the box on writing academic papers. And I checked these boxes and wasn't really appreciating the full experience of it until I was in it. And through that process realized that it was most rewarding to me when I could see research applied, which I think is why I ended up not going the research route. There's certainly a lot of applied disciplines in academia. It just wasn't the right fit for me.
Did you have a hard time doing an interdisciplinary PhD? And the reason I ask is if you go to undergrad and then you go to grad school, what you find is that you start wide and you go really narrow most times for all sorts of reasons. You're kind of answering one question or sometimes even part A of a 5-part question. That's what you're focusing on for a really long time.
Right.
So this idea of an interdisciplinary thing where not only, maybe you are just answering one little sliver of a question, but all of a sudden it's not just in one area, it's looking at an array of areas. Was that difficult to figure out, A, that it was possible, and B, set up?
So I have to give my advisor a lot of credit with that. And he coached me through thinking about the PhD as a skill set that I was learning. So while there was a very specific question that I was answering, it really was about the research skills and in my case, some of the modeling and math skills that I was bringing into the question and applying to the question. I actually completely changed my dissertation halfway through.
No one does that,
your
Christie.
eyes growing
Holy
wide.
cow. Based on what you were learning or based on this is not what I want to answer?
Yeah, based on this just wasn't fulfilling, and I was struggling with the grant writing and in terms of how to tell the story, because I was struggling with the story myself. In my master's work, as I mentioned, the application was marine mammal conservation, but the real skill set was, again, the working on getting data sets from different disciplines. In that case, looking at policy and shipping and marine mammal sightings and kind of overlapping them to come up with a risk model. And I thought, yeah, marine mammals are, you get the warm and fuzzies about it. And it is cool. If you go out in the Gulf of Maine on a whale watch and you see a whale, it's amazing. So I thought, how lucky am I that I get to do this? And there actually wasn't a field work component that I did for my research. I was using data from different sources from years and years of field work, but I did get to help out with the field work, for other projects as sort of my reward, which was so cool. And I thought, okay, this is great. I started my PhD and I was using what's called a wavelet analysis. And again, it's just really interesting math to find a way to succinctly characterize how a whale is moving through the water. And I was looking at these deep diving whales that have a really unique, really cool gait. And it was so much fun. And I do the work and I present at a conference and I'm writing the paper, and you have to write, this is why it's important. This is why we need to know about it. And there absolutely is value there. And I was struggling to tell the story and to figure out what the next step was, partly because I was just having so much fun with the math. And I really was stuck in this hole. And again, to give my advisor credit, we would have walking meetings and we're walking and he said, you seem stuck and it seems like you need it would help if you had a project where you could see the end result. And there's this question with horses where people are trying to keep horses safe. And if we can answer this question, we can do these things and horses are safer. And I thought, yes, I don't know anything about horses, but I really wanted that applied piece where, not 10 years later, but right away I could see action.
What a great story for explaining what an advisor really does. They're just guiding you and they're not telling you what to do, but they're giving you option. And more importantly, seeing when you're stuck. Where did the beer come from?
Okay, so fast forward, I graduated. I was doing the work. I got to travel. I was actually an engineer working outside a lot of the time, which was cool. And there came a point where I needed a change, and sort of I'm fortunate to have a partner who is very patient through grad school. And I joke that his reward is that he got to open a brewery once I was done grad school. But the reality was that brewing really was his passion. And he opened a business along with our business partners. I was helping out with the brewery on weekends. And then I was ready for a career change, my next shift. So about a year into the brewery, I left my consulting work completely and said, let's do this brewery thing. We're at a size where it made sense to have a little more focus on a dedicated person for quality control and quality assurance. So I stepped into that.
Maybe you could, for those of us who just enjoy the fruits of that kind of labor, you could explain more explicitly what quality assurance and quality control is in the context of a brewery, and then why it made sense at the size you're at. And for people who may have skipped what eventual introduction I'm going to do to this podcast, I should point out we are talking about Foundation Brewery, which is, like I said, one of my favorites. But just I think the work that you guys are doing, talking about beer as it relates to the world around us, has been really cool. Which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you.
Well, so a funny story about how we came up with the name Foundation Brewing. We were, kicking around different ideas and basically landed on, if you look back through human kind of evolutionary history, beer played a key role and fermentation played such a key role in having safe food and water. And so that was the foundation of civilization, if you will.
I love that reach.
And yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so many layers to it. We just nerd out about it. And you'll notice that's not really the story on our webpage because it, just get lost in the weeds with
right.
it.
Yeah.
But it's fun. We sit back with a pint and chat about it. So at Foundation, quality control, quality assurance. So the difference between the two, first of all, is quality control is really looking at things retroactively. So we have the finished beer, and then we're checking it to make sure that it kind of gets to the consumer, the person who's drinking the beer, the way we want it to. Quality assurance are the steps that we take along the way before the beer goes out, to make sure things happen the way we want them to. So we have a lot of tight standard operating procedures or SOPs for how we brew, how we clean. Working in a brewery is a lot of cleaning. We have these, I think this is really cool. So there's a standard piece of equipment for a lot of breweries called a luminometer. And they're these swabs where you swab your equipment as a way to check that it's cleaned the way you expected it to be. And it's collecting ATP, which is in every kind of cell that exists. So you don't know, what it could be a cell from hop sludge that didn't get cleaned, or it could be a cell from, doesn't matter. Just there's ATP there, and the luminometer detects it. And it's so cool to go back and remember biology. I think even high school biology, where you learn about ATP and mitochondria, and we're using that. We're checking for ATP in the brewery.
So the brewing lets you use every bit of your educational background, then, right? You've got the biology. I'll even argue you have the human ecology. We can talk about your interest in clean water, as well as less impactful climate change aspects of brewing, which I think people probably don't know about, all the way to an immediate application. Like you really hit the sweet spot with it. Did you know that going in, or was it more like, well, I know how to do all this analysis, I'll just do that? Or, did you realize it was going to be that much of a weaving together of all of those things?
Well, so I have the luxury that I got to create it to be what I wanted. And one of the things that I love about science is the research and learning. So I got to learn about a beverage processing and which questions should be asked, and pull in from different disciplines to create what our program is. So our Foundations program is a little different from other breweries our size, and that's for a couple reasons, I think. One is that I got to create it to be what I want it to be, and the second is that I'm a pretty risk averse person. So if we've, committed to doing this business and wanting to do it right, and I really, really don't want anything to go wrong. So there's the ASBC, the American Society of Brewing Chemists. They put out this great chart about, if you're brewing this much beer, these are the tests that you want to make sure you're doing. And that's, a pretty good checklist. And maybe it's the risk averse person, maybe it's the competitive person who's done a lot of sports. I don't know. I always want to be at least a level above what a brewery our size should be doing.
So that's when you say for your size, you're doing more than other people. First of all, the size is based on the amount of beer that you're brewing, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so now I totally appreciate the competitive aspect. Does it cost a whole lot more to go to that next step? And I ask that with the acknowledgement that there are things that can't be quantified in the cost, and that pure money is not the sole reason to make decisions.
Yeah, for sure. So there are a few layers to that. The first is that it really doesn't cost a lot more in terms of equipment costs. When you think of all your costs for operating a brewery, the equipment that we have in our lab, they're not insignificant, but they're definitely within a well-defined budget. So saying that I have the luxury of creating the program I wanted, I didn't have the luxury of a wide open budget. There certainly is a time cost. So having the background that I do, I was able to step right into a lot of these pieces. I'm also going to give a shout out, though, to the Quality Collaboratory, or QC2, down at the University of Southern Maine. So a lot of the equipment that would be beyond our reach is available through the QC2 lab, and they take samples from breweries. And Dr. Lucy Benedict does a great job with that lab and talking through questions that. So we've worked with her on some really basic research questions in terms of understanding, for example, how much trace minerals are coming through our process, which is important to yeast health, all the way to just getting a double check on our final product. We have some basic equipment where we can test things as a proxy to understand what's happening, but then the QC2 lab has the equipment to verify with gas chromatography, for example, to say, no, this absolutely is what's chemically in your beer that you verified sort of in this secondary way.
So I'm going to make you tell us, let me rephrase that. Would you please talk about one test that you do that helps you know that you've got the quality control under control? Like, instead of us talking in this like, we do this test, just pick one. Just pick one as an example, so people have you have to
one. Pick. Okay. Well, I will choose a microbiological test because it really is a key one. It's called the HLP, and it stands for someone's name who developed the test. The L and the P for lactobacillus. So lactobacillus and pediococcus are two groups of bacteria that are our highest risk spoilers because they are everywhere in the environment. They're great fermenters. So we've been doing some, in my home, my partner and I have been doing lots of vegetable fermentation this summer with an abundance of veggies. And we don't have to add anything to it because lacto and pedio and some other species are just on the vegetables, and they ferment and they do a great job, and it's yummy and great. If those get into our beer, they would make the beer sour, and they might create a really kind of weird ropey texture, and it's pretty funky. Some of the like cool ship beers would have those species in them, and that's a very different flavor profile than what most folks are looking for in a can of beer. So it's everywhere, and that is a test that we run actually at different steps through the brewing process to make absolutely sure that we're not going to end up with a beer that tastes kind of sour and funky.
So how do you get it out? This is the quality assurance piece, right? So how do you make sure it's not in there during the process?
Oh, gotcha. All right. So you don't, if it's in there, you don't get it out. You make sure it doesn't get in. So that's
got it. Okay. No wonder you look so confused. How do you make sure you don't start with it? Let's start there. How do you?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, so when malt comes in, malt comes from a grain. It actually has lots of stuff living on it. So the first part is that where we bring the malt in, we try to isolate that from the rest of the brewery. But really, on a production scale brewery, once you've in the brew house, you've created wort. So that's your sugary water. Throw some hops in the kettle, and cool it and pump it off to a fermenter along with yeast. So from that point on, your beer really shouldn't ever touch the open air again. There's some tricks with doing dry hopped beers to make sure nothing gets in, because you do need to open the tank for that. And there's some strategies that we use, but basically it's making sure that it never touches atmosphere again, and that all of our equipment is squeaky clean and sanitized.
How do you sanitize all the equipment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we use something, a process called, we do a CIP and SIP. So CIP, clean in place, sanitize in place for SIP. And basically there's a ball at the top of the tank, and you get a pump and you pump your cleaner through, and cleaners and your sanitizer through to hit every surface of your tanks and your hoses. So we've done some really fun experimenting with that and process changes through the years. But basically we're playing with acids and bases. And at the end of the process, we put all of the used acid and base into one big IBC so that they cross-homogenate and neutralize, and you have some effectively dirty, salty water that's then safe. So I think is really cool. So as you mentioned at Foundation, we are always thinking about how can we be more mindful of our water use, because a lot of water is used for all of the cleaning and sanitizing processes. And then we also have a lot of discharge, and we need to be mindful of total solids that go down the drain and off to Portland Water District, and ultimately Casco Bay, really, because water connects everything in a very literal sense, not metaphorical.
No, I knew what you meant. I mean, isn't that, like you said, it was the foundation, fermentation, the foundation of arguably human civilization, right? Once we decided to stick in place 10,000 years ago, and then you would need to do stuff with water because it wasn't potable, but it's still all there, right? It needed to be done. So I'm going to ask you a leading question because I know about this project, and I know it's not directly related to what Foundation does, but I just think it's a really cool project and an innovative approach to addressing climate change from the perspective of an organization whose mission is not about climate change, but who recognizes that we all can do something. So would you mind talking at as long of length as you would like about the project that you did with Sharon Klein's class? Longtime listeners of the podcast will recognize Sharon's name. She was actually on early on to talk about her love of solar energy and other things. But she teaches this community engagement class where the students, I think they're all juniors and seniors, have to pick a project in the real world, so to speak, and address an energy issue or a climate issue. And I'm going to just leave it at there because my background was to connect you with other people. I don't actually ever do any work. I just make people do more work, and this is one of them. So, and the reason I like this so much, but just to give you my agenda here, is, like I said, I think it's really cool and interesting, but I think one of the things that people find with climate change is it can be so overwhelming, right? How can any one person make a difference? And that's kind of the catch. You can't unless you combine together and you start adding up what every one organization or one person can do. And I love that this was right up your alley to think about and then to make it work, or at least figure out how to make it work, is just really cool and fascinating.
No, it was such a cool project. And it actually, I personally, it was really good timing because the climate crisis is daunting and just has been consuming my mind as many other people. And thinking about what kind of larger scale systemic changes, everyone go ride a bike. That's awesome. And it's good for your health. And we need some really, really big changes. And I think they're really exciting from a science, engineering, and technology perspective. We're on the cusp of some really cool stuff. So coming back to this class, he connected me with another engineer, Tamara Reiser, and who was just great, and a group of wonderful students. So it was actually an economics class, and they wanted to ask the question of what would it look like to reduce the carbon dioxide use at a brewery. And I said, yes, let's do that, because this is something we need to do at our brewery. We want to do because it's the right thing to do. So let's do it. So basically it was a great group of students, and each student was taking a different kind of sliver of the brewery and thinking about our carbon dioxide use. So to step you through that, after we brew wort, it goes, the beer gets pumped into a fermenter, as I mentioned, and that's at that point, the yeast wants some oxygen. So the students were looking at what points do we introduce carbon dioxide into the process? If you're home brewing, you kind of let the yeast do their thing. Yeast produces carbon dioxide. At a production scale, we need more control. So we actually bring carbon dioxide into the process and originally used it to push beer from one tank to another. So from a fermenter to a bright tank or a finishing tank, if you will. And it would always be a pneumatic push because that's gentler on the beer rather than pumping and agitating it.
So a pneumatic push is just, think of it like I'm trying to, it's almost like you have a big block and you're just pushing the air. Does that?
Yeah.
Effect, just to visualize it.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you think of, and we use carbon dioxide, or I'll give you the spoiler that we switch to nitrogen.
Got it.
Yeah. So what you typically do is use something like a gas like carbon dioxide, because oxygen just destroys the flavor of beer. So you don't want any oxygen. Carbon dioxide is great. You get pure carbon dioxide, which, by the way, comes from industrial petroleum processes and fossil gases, and some other places, but most of the carbon dioxide that we use in New England is coming from these other industries. So you use the carbon dioxide as potential energy. So you use that pressure to push your beer, which is great. You don't agitate your beer. And then once it's in your finishing tank, use a little more carbon dioxide to get it to whatever carbonation level that you want to get it to. And then we use some more carbon dioxide in the packaging process, again, to displace any oxygen containing air. Okay, so that's what we do. Students came in, and one group actually mapped out what the brewery looks like from an engineering schematic sense, so that we can very clearly say, boom, right here, we use carbon dioxide, but maybe we don't have to. Let's ask what we could do there instead. And right here, carbon dioxide is being produced. What could we do to potentially capture that rather than shipping it in from a fossil fuel industry? So they also looked at all the economies of that and what are the different costs to make these transitions.
Okay. I had no idea that the students did the schematic. How cool is that?
Yeah, they did. And it really was great timing, because it's a question that we were starting to ask, and the hours that went into it, it was a slow process to work through the problem. So having the students come in and help with that was such great timing. So they mapped out the process and looked at where we were consuming carbon dioxide for different reasons. And one of the reasons that we use carbon dioxide is actually to purge all of the ambient air out of a tank before we then push beer into it. So you actually have two pieces where we would fill a tank with carbon dioxide on one. If you think about moving from tank A to tank B, tank B is purged with carbon dioxide. So that's a large volume. Our tanks are 30 to 60 barrels, each barrel being 31 gallons. And this is pressurized gas. So, it's more. And then we would take a similar volume of pressurized gas to have the energy to push beer into the tank that's been purged with carbon dioxide. So they looked at that and calculated how much mass of carbon dioxide that actually is. And we didn't actually, the only point in the brewing process where we need carbon dioxide to make beer what it is the actual carbonation of the finished product. All these other steps, we can use nitrogen. which is approximately 80% of our atmosphere. And it's pure. And we've got a place right in Kittery, Maine that pulls nitrogen gas out of the atmosphere to create this very pure form that we need. So to, briefly summarize a lot of work that these students did is we identified some places where we could bring in nitrogen. They found the nitrogen was more cost effective and it's relatively locally produced. It's not coming from a fossil fuel industry. And we're not releasing all of this extra carbon dioxide into the air.
I think it's really interesting. My instinct tells me that carbon dioxide is used because it's inert and easy to manipulate. And it's because it's what's always been done. And we, the beer industry and others, have never had to think about, should we be using this? Because that's just how it's always been done. And now that we're at a point where it makes sense to rethink how we do things, you find this really cool way to do it, and it's actually cheaper. Are you kidding me? Like that rarely happens.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. Now, the next step that the students another subset of these students worked on was looking at carbon capture in a brewery. So the yeast is fermenting, they're producing ethanol for your alcohol content in the beer, and also producing carbon dioxide. And capturing carbon dioxide or carbon capture is a non-trivial challenge. As we know, that new system just came online in Iceland, which is so exciting and still so tiny for the scope of what we need to be doing, but it's a great step. So in brewing, there are some folks who are working on carbon capture so that you can take what the yeast is producing and use that and basically store it and then use it later in the process where we do need a little bit of carbon dioxide. And that's our next step, to look into those systems.
Does the yeast produce more carbon dioxide than you could use in each vat of beer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the short answer is it potentially does a little bit, but it's more complicated because early in fermentation, the yeast are producing carbon dioxide, but also releasing these other aromatic compounds that need to be scrubbed from the carbon dioxide that actually are more off flavors. They're not really desirable flavors. But to apply that to a question of, could we use that carbon dioxide somewhere else? There isn't an easy answer, but I don't think that means no.
Fair enough. And just to kind of help with the scale of Foundation versus other breweries, so that if people are listening, they can think about where that's at. What is the size of Foundation compared to some of the other Maine breweries that people have heard of versus some of the really vastly large scale, gigantic industry breweries that certainly everybody has heard of because they pay for ridiculous commercials?
Oh gosh, we are so tiny.
No, I knew that part. I just want to try to give a range here.
Yeah. Let me think of
maybe just stick with Maine if that helps.
So in Maine, we're actually within, I believe, the last time I checked, we're within sort of the top 10 largest breweries, but there's a large caveat that the largest breweries in Maine are significantly larger, like orders of magnitude, or at least an order of magnitude larger than us.
So even within the top 10, there's big steps.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. And then in Maine, we actually have over 100 microbreweries now, well over, and there's a long tail in terms of the size. So we're sort of at the top of that tail producing. So we're still under 5,000 barrels of beer annually, which is a benchmark used in the industry, but not necessarily very helpful for outside the industry.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. For context, so most of our beer is still, we do sell some beer out of state, but we're still largely in state. The vast majority of our beer is sold in state.
What's your favorite beer or beer type? I won't make you pick one that you guys brew. So I've had the luxury. We've done a science of beer session with you, which is still one of my favorite afternoons of taste testing and having. I have a background in chemistry, but it never got to be so applied. It was always it's very lab focused and. But you have a really, I think, wide array of beers, which is not. It's not trivial. There's all different styles and tastes. So maybe you can't pick one that you prefer, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. We do a full spectrum of brewing, and this ties into loving interdisciplinary projects. That it's really about the skills that go into the production. So I usually, these days at least, I go back to a traditional lager. So I love Riverton Flyer. And of course, there's the fun story. So there's the Riverton Trolley Park right across from the brewery. And how cool would it be to see trolleys going through Portland again? But yeah, I do. I love a good traditional lager. And it's neat to look through brewing history, going back to carbon capture. There's another piece of equipment that the students were analyzing, and it's called a spunding valve. And it's a relatively simple piece of equipment, but basically you add it to the tank after the yeast has gone through some of the off flavors that you don't want to capture. And you put this valve on your tank, and it allows the yeast to build a natural pressure. So then you need less gas to push the beer from one tank to another. And this spunding valve is something the Germans developed a while back to say, yeast produce carbon dioxide. Let's use it for the process. So that kind of ties into my love of lagers. My first beers were over. I have family who lives in Germany, and my cousins took me to a beer festival when I was, we'll say I was 16, because that's legal over there. I was just shy of 16.
How do you all decide what beer to brew? I know you're not the head brewer. I know you're in quality assurance, quality control, but I would imagine that you don't have a say in it, but you have to adapt some of the processes to make sure that you hit it right. So how do you all decide that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's some of seeing what people are excited to be drinking. Certainly New England IPAs and Epiphany, our main IPA, we brew the most of Epiphany. And then the other, we do a lot of one-off batches. Seems like there's something new every week, and it is hard to keep up. So some of that is, here's a neat idea. Let's give it a try. Another piece of it is, we really do approach brewing as this full spectrum brewing perspective, and thinking about, we haven't done a new lager in a while. So what kind of lager do we want to do, and let's go from there. But I don't do any recipe development, because that is not my wheelhouse.
No, I didn't think that
not my skill set.
But do you have to think about the process of just making sure each step of the way that the recipe, that what the recipe calls for, you can do in the brewing process itself?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's got to be a lot of back and forth with that, right?
There is. And so we actually do a lot of kettle sours, our My Jam series, which is a lot of fun, because that beer actually starts in our lab. So we grow our own lactobacillus culture. And, I mentioned lacto is one of can be the death of a beer where you don't want it. But for a kettle sour, we actually use it to sour the wort, and then use heat to kill it completely dead, make sure it doesn't get anywhere else. And we do some additional quality checks around that whole process to make sure first of all, the bacteria is growing the way we want it to and giving us the flavors that we want, and then that it's not getting anywhere else or anywhere that we wouldn't want it to be.
Okay, final question. How long from start to finish for let's do a new lager? We haven't had one in a while.
Oh gosh, let's see. So I'd say, a couple months to decide on what's going to be brewed for that new lager, and for the design. This isn't science, but I'm fascinated by it because I don't have that design piece. Our label design person, she does such a cool job. So that's where a lot of the time goes in. Joel will develop a recipe, and he does that pretty quickly. And that's coming from experience with the science of brewing and knowing what's the cause and effect of different ingredients and processes. And then a couple weeks to brew the beer, and off it goes. It really is around the planning, and a lot of the time is more about the concept of what we're going to brew.
That's so cool, and explains pretty succinctly why you are able to do one-offs and experiment and test things out.
Yeah, for sure.
So have you guys, I know that I said that was my final question.
No, I could talk about science all day.
We could go for hours. So many people would be tired of us, but we would have a great time.
Yeah.
How have you all brewed a beer that you thought was just the bee's knees and it just tanked for whatever reason? And or is it never that extreme?
So fortunately, I don't think we've had anything that extreme. That said, I will share, we brewed a beer. Originally, we brewed it one holiday season just to give to other breweries as a little, goodwill. And we called it Gemütlichkeit, which is a German word without a direct English translation of good feelings and friendship through the holidays. And from my German background, I thought, this is amazing. And the next year and it was a great beer. It was just this really easy drinking, a light lager. And I thought, this is the bee's knees. And so we did brew it the next year for release. And the name Gemütlichkeit tanked for understandable reasons, but I resisted for a long time. And finally, everyone else said, no, seriously, it needs to change. So that became Hansel. And now we have Hansel, and Gretel's our Oktoberfest.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, now at least I know what to look for, because I was thinking I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, no, you will not see Gemütlichkeit. People
what a
would come
bummer.
up to the tasting room and just kind of point and say that one. And I don't blame them. If we did a beer with a French name, I would fall to pieces. I wouldn't know what to do.
The fail wasn't the beer. It was the name. The name. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Christie, I am, as always, delighted to talk to you. I always feel like my day is going to be all the better because you and I have had a chance to chat. And I actually really appreciate the work y'all are doing, thinking about the whole ecosystem. And I don't just mean within the brewery, but within kind of our place in the world. Like you, the climate crisis, it seems ever present. So to know that, one of my favorite breweries is also thinking about it somehow makes it easier. So thanks for everything.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for listening to the Maine Science Podcast. I'm delighted to let you know that the MSF is planning for our return March 16th through 20th, 2022. Our headliner event for 2022 is our first Maine-grown headliner event, The Warming Sea, an exploration of hope in the face of the climate crisis. This is the long-awaited, for me and others, world premiere of the MSF commission piece, The Warming Sea, written by composer Lucas Richmond. The piece will be performed by the Bangor Symphony Orchestra. Links to both the MSF call for ideas and the headliner event are in the show notes. The Maine Science Podcast is recorded at Discovery Studios at the Maine Discovery Museum in Bangor, Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is produced and edited by me, Kate Dickerson. I received production support from Miranda Bouchard and social media support from Next Media. The Discover Maine theme was written and performed by Nick Parker.